Hello, I'm Pamela Davitt with DataGuard 365. We welcome you to our podcast today with Epic Brokers. We're pleased to have Richard May, Strategic Placement Leader of Epic's National Cyber Practice, together with us today, as well as DataGuard's Operations and Chief Information Security Officer, Frank Howard. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Morning. Thanks for having us.
You bet. Richard, on May 6th, when you and I met for part one of this podcast, you shared with us the insurer's perspective of today's cybersecurity demands to companies and what underwriters weigh most heavily when they're trying to determine whether claims should be approved and paid. And the insights you provided were really valuable, so we thank you for that. You bet. Today's broadcast, we're going to address 5 categories of questions which the ransomware supplemental questionnaire asks of companies. Requirements they need to fulfill to qualify and enjoy ongoing coverage and have claims paid in the event that's necessary. And we'll also talk a little bit about why cyber insurers have gotten tougher on risk assessments and what our customers, our viewers, can do to improve or strengthen their position with their insurance coverage. So we hope that we're able to provide listeners today. Our intention is that you, Richard, will give us insights from the insurer's perspective about the necessity of these requirements and meeting those. And then Frank, you, from your experience and in the trenches of delivering these critical pieces to customers day in and day out, will share your insights, okay? So
Right.
let's go ahead and get started. Richard, you categorized the questions in this supplemental questionnaire document into buckets, and we're going to look at each one of those buckets. The first one up was training. Go ahead and tell us about that, if you would.
Right. So I think most security experts will tell you that one of the most important lines of defense in protecting yourselves from a security incident are the staff, the employees and colleagues. It's still true that many incidents arise from malicious attacks that are arriving via email, cleverly worded, that you could describe them as a form of social engineering. For example, 2 attacks against law firms were worded that they were going to give the attorneys some awards, and they were asking for bioinfo, and clicking on that link downloaded malware. It's fairly common that these guys are specifically looking through social media, trying to find out information about individuals within the firm so that their emails can be very realistic and on point, including, for example, that they're not in the office at the moment, they're on vacation, those kinds of things. So both when you see an odd, an unsolicited email from someone you don't know, but also when you see something which is just out of character for someone you do know, the training process is really intended to try and make people understand that they need to be very wary of both of those and appropriate responses. As you've said, I'm not a technologist, so I don't exactly understand how the malware works. But that front line of defense, the knowledge of the individuals is super important. It was reasonably common to see firms doing that on an annual basis. What insurers really are beginning to expect is much more timely, much more constant training, for example, on a quarterly cycle. So Frank, do you want to add your technology side to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, there's usually some red flags on things that come in, but I mean, anecdotally, we see this all the time. We see the emails coming in, to someone like myself or on our team, maybe the IT team, they see it right away. It's a different email address, a Gmail address, even though it tries to say that it's from that person. So there's definite indicators that just a simple training program that you're hitting often with your employees, like you said, it used to be annual, if any, but now it's becoming more more often, whether that be, quarterly, even monthly. Also, I know on the supplement there's the questions about phishing simulations. So are you actually trying to attack your own people to see how they'll respond? And then based on how they respond, you do remedial training, and you are constantly just kind of reassessing. And then also just as things change in the environment, I mean, there's constant, depending on what's going on in the world, whether, COVID with vaccine information. So that was a good one that would try to come through because people were trying to get information. So they'd click on it and go to, a web page. Maybe it was a malicious web page. But I think, there was a recent Stanford study that said 88% of data breaches actually are caused by human error. That's a big hole. So if we can reduce that down by having the security awareness training and hitting people, then yeah, that's a great thing. And for insurers, you don't want to have to pay the money out. So yeah, it's a great thing.
So it's worth just mentioning here, Pamela, some insurance policies have risk management attached to them. And in some instances, training, specifically phishing, is actually something that comes along with the policy. Oddly, very few insureds actually use their risk management tools, which in some instances, I can understand if you're a large, sophisticated entity and you've already got this stuff in place, but that's also true for smaller entities as well. So it's worth looking at the risk management tools that are provided by your insurance policy. You may be pleasantly surprised.
And they should take advantage of that, Richard. I hear you
Yeah,
saying absolutely.
And a key thing on that, it's almost like people thinking that we can just buy software and it'll solve all the world's problems. If you don't have someone that's in charge of that risk management program, that's taking this training, and a program manager that is making sure that people are doing what they should be doing, following up, that's where a lot of things kind of fall through the cracks because no one has ownership of it to actually see it through it. And maybe it's a value thing. They don't see the actual value into it where, I'm glad to see some of these questions now being put by insurers because it's giving a little bit of teeth, right? So the things that we know that they need to be doing, now they have a little bit more of a reason to.
Very good. Thank you both. Great comments. What about our second bucket of email?
Right. So this is a little bit more technology driven, but they're really looking to see that the email systems are set up in such a way that they're providing reasonable levels of protection. So many people use Office. The questions are perhaps somewhat geared towards the use of email through Office. But they're looking for you to use the Sender Policy Framework, DKIM. They're expecting you to have some form of defense for when individuals click on a link, some form of blocking technology so that you can't get to known malicious websites, and for the system to check incoming attachments to see whether or not they contain malicious documents. And it's also becoming very common for them to expect the technology team to be able to remove phishing emails from centrally through basically an automated process. We have a button in our email where we can report a phishing attempt. That goes back to our technology team. They look at it, and if they believe it to be valid, they remove any identical emails from all inboxes so that no one can actually accidentally click on it. So as I said, they're mostly technology defenses. The phishing one, it obviously leverages the training we just talked about as well. But those are the kinds of things that they're expecting to see now. And very importantly, and this applies to all external resources, they do expect to see MFA, multi-factor authentication, enabled when you're attempting to access any corporate resources from outside the network. So Frank.
You just segued nicely into our third bucket, but before we go to MFA, Frank, did you have anything to say about emails?
Yeah, the thing is with email, that's one of the areas where I mean, it's been an attack vector for a long time. So that is an area where we're not lacking for technology. The problem is the implementation. The devil's always in the details, right? So there's different add-ons that you can get for email. There's different things that Microsoft Office 365 does as part of its standard package. And then there's something that they add on that gives you advanced email protection. Actually, they call it advanced threat protection now. It's Defender for email. But the problem is making sure that people have the budget to buy those extra tools, because email has always been a cat and mouse game. It's the easiest way to get into an organization because you have to accept email anyway, right? So Verizon comes out with a data breach analysis every year, and the one they published last year was 94% of malware is delivered through email. I mean, that's crazy, right? I mean, we're not just having these bad guys that are going after us, trying to hack in through your defenses on your firewall. It's all coming in because you have to have these emails. And then as an IT person, I don't want to block something that's good. If I get a call from the CEO because he missed an important deadline because he didn't get the email for the board meeting, he's probably gonna be mad at me. So, it's a constant for IT people, especially. They're trying to balance keeping people happy with, protection and a lot of the time keeping them safe. Exactly. Yeah. So, and then some of the other things that Richard mentioned, the very technical things, the problem that we see in industry with like DKIM, SPF, so some funny acronyms, is that is basically a way of a sender saying, hey, I am who I say I am. But you're very dependent upon people actually setting that up. If they don't set that up, which many companies don't, then you can't really leverage it, because ideally you're saying, if they don't have this set up, I'm going to throw it away. The problem is so many companies, whether it be small, mid-sized companies, they may not know that they need to set it up, or their IT staff is working on just making sure things don't crash. So that's part of the difficulty in the various tools and technology that's available. We have to get everyone kind of pulling in the same direction in order to be able to leverage and cut down, that 94% hole and see how small we can make it.
So, Richard, you started to segue. You mentioned MFA, multi-factor authentication, and asked Frank for input. And this is something that I've heard you, Frank, say companies should know to do. This is just like a minimum performance precaution or safeguard. Do you have anything to say more about that?
Yeah, and over the years, I started my IT career 25 years ago, and lots changed, right? There is more of a focus on security, not as much for everyone, if it's not something that's kind of top of mind. But, multi-factor authentication. So there's 3 different types of authentication. It's something so it's a password, maybe a PIN number. Something you have, maybe a key fob, or you might have your phone with a little authenticator app on it, or something you are. So biometric thumb scan, face recognition, that type of thing. So the technology is there. I remember, early days when we would access a VPN of a client, we would have one of those. There was a big blue card that had numbers that would constantly change. It was an RSA ID keypad that we had to enter in. But really beyond that, there weren't a whole lot of people that were using it. The reason I say now it makes so much sense is, one, there's a lot of people being tricked into giving their email credentials away. They get a phishing email that tries to trick them into going in, logging in with their email and password. And then once they have that, they just log in on the back end. You can go to mail.office365.com and anybody can get in. And then they're in, they sit there, they see what's happening. So it's easy to trick you into giving up your credentials. I've seen IT admins give up their credentials, which are really scary situations. But the multi-factor is now common, right? Office 365 provides it. Email provides it. The Google Suite provides it. So there's no excuse not to do it. The excuse a lot of people use, and from a security standpoint, we hear this all the time, it's not convenient. I have to do an extra step. I don't want to have to do that, every so often. And we tell people security is not convenient, but neither is getting taken down by a ransomware attack.
Got it. All right. And it's a requirement, isn't it, Richard? I mean, just flat out on
Right.
this.
Yeah, absolutely. So MFA, multi-factor authentication, is one of those things that's becoming a minimum bar. But there is a second element to it. The other issue that insurers have is multi-factor authentication for privileged users. So that's sitting inside the network. They expect people with privileged access, but they're expecting a couple of things. The first is that they have a separate ID from their regular ID for doing privileged work, and that those separate IDs do not have access to email and other services. And just going back to the previous conversation, the reason for that is because email is such a vector, right? But the second thing they expect is that those IDs are protected themselves by MFA as well. I actually have a question for Frank here. So when I'm talking to my clients, it's reasonably common that they've set up MFA now for those end users coming into the network. Mm-hmm. It's much less common that they put MFA onto the privileged users, which I find puzzling because, when I've read about claims, the real damage is often done by getting access to those privileged accounts, and that's been true for years. So what is it about putting MFA on those privileged accounts which is a barrier?
I think the big thing is that it's additional software. A lot of IT doesn't really have the budget. It's smaller groups. They're not adding this technology to their privileged accounts. And with security, there's so many different best practices that should be applied. Just determining, like you said, they're not running with those privileges. It's something that they actually have to have either a second account or a way of actually getting escalated privileges in order to do that with a multi-factor. It's a convenience thing. It's a budget thing. There's multiple roadblocks to making it easy to get that done in all environments. I agree. It's a need, a necessity nowadays.
Right. So just wrapping that up from my perspective, the insurers are expecting those I guess it's three things, right? Multi-factor authentication coming in from outside the network, a separate privileged user account, and that account is protected by MFA. Those are the three sort of big buckets of protecting the network that the insurers are looking for coming in. And as I said, without those, many insurers are declining out of hand.
And Frank, I've heard you take on the hard discussions with customers and don't always tell them what they want to hear, but what they need to do to secure themselves. So here you have it straight from the horse's mouth. Richard May tells you must, they need to be told that this is something they should be doing. So it adds a little, it makes it a little easier for you to take up those hard discussions maybe. Excellent. So the fourth bucket was endpoint detection response. Frank, how about you take that first?
Sorry, this is one of those areas where it is a technology and a people item. I hate to keep going back to the good old days, but the security, the threat landscape has changed significantly over the last 5 years. We used to be able to just have antivirus, and you had Norton or whatever it was back in the day that you had running. And every once in a while, it would catch something, it would block something that was bad, it would quarantine it, and the IT would say, yep, that's cool. Once they actually did see it, a lot of times they didn't really have anyone monitoring that. It was just one of those kind of asides that, the threat was you had a piece of malware that didn't really do a whole lot and was probably known, and it was stopped by basic antivirus. Where we've been, not just going, but kind of where we are now is more of an advanced, again, endpoint protection platforms. There's multiple ones out there, but essentially leveraging technology that not only looks for bad software based on reputation or known bad software, but it's looking for what happens if someone uses my IT tools against me. What happens? I mean, I do network scans all the time because I'm trying to find out what an endpoint is out there. Well, that's a good way for bad actors to do reconnaissance. And if antivirus blocks that, just because of that software, then it doesn't block it because that's what IT guys use. So now it's a matter of, okay, what else is being done? And you have to have the software that can learn, can identify, can see baselines across your network as far as what's normal. But then based on that, it does a better job of actually alerting for the detection side of things, the endpoint detection response. Beyond that, it's a matter of making sure that you're actually doing something with it. There's a lot of automated things that the advanced technology will do now.
Yeah.
But if you don't couple that, nothing's 100%, right? There's no silver bullet in our industry. I wish there was. But there are typically items, when you look at behavior, you have to see multiple things happen. Well, if you don't trigger on the first thing and maybe trigger on the fourth or fifth, then someone still has to look at what all happened, see, do analysis to kind of determine what led up, what do we need to fix, where did it come from, how can we prevent this in the future, typical incident response. But it's more than just saying, okay, we have this great piece of software and we just, let HAL do its thing.
So Frank, you're talking about artificial intelligence with behavioral detection monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And Richard, this kind of security arrangement, insurers look very favorably on that, don't they?
Yeah. So to Frank's point, traditional antivirus just isn't enough, and insurers recognize that. So they're looking for the deployment of these heuristic protection mechanisms. And they're also expecting, if not 24/7 eyes on glass, that there's some form of 24/7 escalation process. To Frank's point, so that the response piece can be launched as quickly as possible to contain any damage to the network to the minimum amount possible.
Okay, very good. Our fifth bucket were questions that have to do with patches and backups. Would you like to take that first, Richard? How do insurers look at that? I mean,
right. So patches. Everyone I think recognizes that most entities need to test a patch to make sure that it isn't going to break something else within their environment. And because of that, in most instances, patches are not deployed instantly. They go through a quality check process. But having said that, insurers still expect those patches to actually be put down onto the network, especially if it's a critical patch that's tied into some kind of security issue. And then, just taking a couple of sort of super critical ones as examples, with SolarWinds and the Microsoft Exchange from earlier this year. Those are ones that they expect to be deployed for all intents and purposes immediately. And I do mean immediately, right? Like, hours after they came out is the expectation, because they provided such an awful gap in the overall security. So they do want to see that there are good patch processes in place. And then when we switch to backups, the real issue is now that the ransomware can get to a backup if it's not protected. So, there was a strong move to just simple online backups. But unless those backups are themselves isolated in some way, shape, or form to protect against ransomware getting into the backup itself, it's a problem, right? So insurers like to see backups pretty much on a continual basis. They need to see that they've been protected, and they need to see that the backups actually work, because the simple fact is that very often when you actually go to do a backup restore, there can be issues. So they like to see some kind of sort of continuing process to make sure that those backups work as intended.
okay. And I was thinking Kaseya, the recent, that was a patch problem, wasn't it, in part?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Frank, did you have anything you wanted to add to Richard's comments?
Yeah, and so patching, like Richard said, you have to have a process around it. You have to have a program. So it's not just pushing out patches. It's identifying what patches need to go out and how quickly. There's a lot of threat intelligence that security people pay attention to, and the person who's handling your patches may not, unless they're getting that advice from someone to say, hey, here's the Exchange vulnerability. That one was all over the news, so that's probably a bad example. But if there's a vulnerability that is just now patched, or if there's a vulnerability that has no patch, so how do you handle issues if there's no known patch for it? Then it's a matter of if you don't have that vulnerability management program, you're not looking at how else can you mitigate the risk that you have because of this vulnerability while we wait for the patch to happen. The recent one is the print nightmare. It's been on a lot of the news, but basically it's an issue with print spooler. Microsoft didn't have a patch. They put out an incomplete patch, and then we're still waiting for some more patches. But there's some guidance around what should be done. So making sure that you have that information and at least that person that's looking into vulnerabilities. I mean, I listen to a podcast every morning as far as some of the recent, the most up-to-date vulnerabilities that are kind of hitting right now, which ones are being exploited, just because there are a lot of things that there's no patches for. So you have to figure out how to take care of it. To the backup conversation, your backup is your last line of defense from a recovery standpoint. Unfortunately, if you get to that point, a business has had significant downtime because of it. So that's one of those where it should be a given by IT that they're testing, that they're making sure. It should be a given that the IT group has their processes in place, that they're testing to make sure that the backups are working, and that that even if they don't fail, can you still restore them? So doing those regular restores, but then it's making sure that you have either that offsite or something that is air gapped, separate from your network, so that if someone is in your network and you don't know it, you're able to keep them from getting to your backup. But at the same time, if backups are not security, so what we've seen is, instead of relying on a ransomware payment because your data and your backups were encrypted, now they're saying, hey, we're going to exfiltrate your data. We're going to suck all of your important information, and you don't even know we're in there. So we're going to suck it off. And then when you have really good backups, good job. But guess what? If you don't pay us, we're going to release all this information. We're going to contact all your clients. We're going to contact your competitors and give them all this information if you don't pay us the ransom. So I'm glad you have great backups, but if you're not detecting when they're in the network and doing what you can to prevent, and then identify and make sure to take quick action, then your backups aren't going to save you.
Thank you. Good to know. We only have a few more minutes. Let's switch tracks and spend those on why cyber insurers have gotten so tough on risk assessments. And Richard, can you speak to what's caused this uneasiness towards managing cyber risk?
Right, absolutely. So it's actually what Frank was just talking about, which is often referred to as double extortion. So in the past, ransomware would encrypt a machine, maybe a few machines, it might get to a server, but it rarely went much past that. The current versions are much more sophisticated. We've seen them take down entire organizations on a global basis, taking them 10, 15 days to recover. And as Frank said, they're also now, before they launch the ransom event itself, they're also exfiltrating the data, and they're using that data as an additional lever in the extortion process. They're also going one step further to what we might refer to as triple extortion, where they're actually contacting either individuals or corporations whose data they now have and telling them that they've got this data, and putting additional leverage on the original victim to pay the ransom to them to make sure that they either recover the data and they get the key. So that double and triple extortion is massively increasing the costs to insurers. As Frank said, if you're going to go to the backups because the ransomware has managed to get across the network, you've got significant downtime. And all of these cyber policies have business interruption coverage in them. So the policies are responding to the extortion itself, paying the ransom, to the business interruption element of the loss, which can be very significant, as well as all of the forensics and legal that go around losing the data in the first place. So you've got a huge increase in the amount of claim that's being paid. So an acceleration of both the number of times this is happening, the frequency, and the absolute cost, the severity, is really making a huge change to the insurance marketplace.
Thank you. What can people do to improve their position? What can these companies do to improve their relationship and their position with insurers?
Well, so clearly having the right answers for the supplement is the easy one, but you've got to get there, right? So and that's where we run into the issue with quite a few smaller or mid-sized insureds where they cannot get the resources internally to manage these processes, which is where it makes real sense to look at either or both, I should say, a managed services provider to just manage the general IT environment, but as well as that, a managed security provider to really look at the security elements of that. And in much the same way that in most large organizations, you've got an information group and a security group, right? Those two skill sets are not the same. You need both of them. And for many organizations, the most cost-effective way is to look externally.
Okay. So maybe our summary statement of what answer to the question, what is the best proactive move a company can make in 2021 is best answered like this. Engage a proven cybersecurity partner and purchase full cyber insurance coverage that includes cyber extortion. Would you two agree that's the right answer?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And may I add to that, I'll beat you to it, Frank, that a proven cybersecurity partner is one whose customers have not experienced operational downtime nor their data seized or compromised, and they're getting it for a price point, to your point, Richard, that small and medium companies can't afford this, for a price point that makes budgetary sense and is fixed and all-encompassing. So they don't get nickeled and dimed. They can budget, they can afford it, and they have that partner that can make sure they're fulfilling all these requirements on this supplemental questionnaire for ransomware coverage. So we do have a couple of questions from viewers, and let's get those out before we sign off here. With insurance pricing and everything else in life based upon credit or history, what does insurance use to properly price policies on cybersecurity?
That's a really good question. And usually it's around loss history. And when I say loss history, I'm talking about the universe of losses, right? So it's an actuarial process based on previous loss history. The problem with cyber is that it's evolving in a way that other lines of business, lines of insurance does not. So the attack vectors, the scale of the attacks, the money involved in the attacks is changing faster than the insurers' processes are really designed to work with. So what that means is that in the current environment, we're seeing insurers stop writing the business because they don't feel they have the information to price it, or they're making substantial changes to the policies in an attempt to protect themselves, for example, by either removing or reducing the coverage for extortion events, or they're looking at the security environment of the company and trying to make an educated guess around what that means from a risk perspective. So what does that mean in the real world? So most insurers actually try to work with existing customers to offer them terms on a go forward basis. but I've seen as much as a 600% price increase given to a client where they did not have multi-factor authentication engaged in both of those areas we talked about. More and more insurers, as I've said before, are just declining risks outright if they don't feel the controls are correct, or they're doing those limitations around ransomware, for example, and they're increasing the retentions substantially. I've seen the retentions go up as much as tenfold on these risks. So they're trying to do quite a lot of stuff, and it does make it very difficult for me as a broker, because this stuff's happening in real time. So we normally start talking to our clients about their renewals 4, 5, even 6 months sometimes before the renewal date, but the market is reacting in a period of weeks. Okay. So we're seeing changes that are happening on a continual basis. And it really does re-emphasize or change perhaps the cost-benefit conversation around some of the technologies and the training that we've been talking about.
Okay, and the second question, we'll wrap up with this. Insurance is historically about assigning fault. If I'm breached through a vendor's system being corrupted like SolarWinds, would my insurance tell me to get SolarWinds to cover my losses, or would my insurance still cover me? And if they still cover me, wouldn't they be accepting risk?
So the way cyber works, if it's your system or a system operated for you by a third party, so software as a system, cloud, that generally falls inside the definition of computer system in the policy, and the policy responds either to an extortion event or a loss of data, or for the system just failing, called system failure. It doesn't look from your perspective or the insured's perspective to assign, if you will, guilt in terms of what failed. All of these policies, though, contain what's known as a subrogation clause, which gives the insurers the rights to go against someone that they believe may have caused the loss. And that's true across basically all liability insurance policies. The same is true for a cyber policy. So absolutely, with something like SolarWinds, if they believed that they did something which was negligent, yes, they would probably subrogate against them. The problem with that is that most software has very strict limitations of liability within it. And whether someone was in fact negligent or not, of course, is a matter of debate and cost. So whilst the insurers have the ability to do that, they will only normally do that if there's a pretty good reason for it, and they have a strong belief that there is in fact negligence. I think Blackboard is probably a better example, or the Gallagher breach that was fairly recent that our clients have got. Gallagher and Blackboard provided, so I should say Gallagher specifically is providing advice back to the individuals that were whose information was released. So they're trying to do the right thing there. It was their breach, and regardless of who legally was supposed to do the notification, they're taking that on. So and with good reason, right? Because they're likely to get sued by insurers if they don't do that.
Okay, very good. So we thank you both. And for listeners, we appreciate you participating or listening in today. We hope that you were able to get some great insights. I feel like you did, and that Richard and Frank did a great job on shedding light on how to best prepare for and manage your company's cyber security risks. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.